Where are you doing most of your recruiting?
I mean, I think most of our recruiting is done. I mean, we're kind of like a little bit all over the map. We do a lot of ECNL, obviously. I mean, majority of college coaches kind of go off of those events, ECNL, ECNLR, depending on the level. GA, I would say those are the two kind of primary ones in the U.S., but obviously the makeup of our rosters like quite international, so we kind of pick and choose certain areas that we go to from an international standpoint. We're in Canada a lot. We're over in Europe quite a bit, and recently we've started kind of trying to make more inroads into like Central and South America.
Is that based on your coaching style and the way that you want to play, that you find those players in those areas?
Yeah, I mean, model of play definitely has a lot to do with it. Kind of, we have a more possession-oriented style of play, and I think we have a lot of success finding players that fit the skill sets that we're looking for in those areas. And yeah, but obviously there's a ton of fantastic players here in the U.S. and we do our best to evaluate those players. But sometimes when you're not there's a lot of competition out there for those U.S. players. So when we go to these ECNL events, I mean, there's 300 plus coaches looking at the same players, right? I mean, on the same field at the same time. And, and if we can find the right niches, which we have, in years past, in certain places that are, not well traveled, and then it becomes a lot, the percentages of us finding, getting those quality players becomes a lot higher for us at that point.
Yeah, so given that there's so much competition at these events, is there something that girls can do before the event to get a better look at them when you're there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, a lot of these players have started, being a bit more savvy, and I would say relentless about their communication. They're emailing, you several times leading up to the event. And I think, obviously as a college coach, and I'm sure there's coaches out there that get a lot more emails than, we do, but we get quite a bit. So, emailing a coach like, 2 weeks or even a week out before an event, it's almost like fighting a losing battle, because, you get X amount of emails a day, and then eventually if you do it a week before, their email is going to get pushed like so far down, unless they're, I've started making folders, which has really helped me when I get players emailing us about events. Like I've created folders, so when I get them, I just slide them right into there after I've kind of had a quick look at it. So when the event gets like right on top of it and it's time to get ready for it, I can just go to that folder and be like, okay, these are all the players that reached out to me. And it's better for me, but I feel like I'm doing the right thing for the players too, because like I haven't lost them in the shuffle, right? And I think that's what, as a player, that's what you're hoping doesn't happen. But I think the players that have emailed like the day before the event, I think it becomes a lot easier to kind of keep them like fresh in your head or right there, and make note that, because that's when, 1 or 2 days out is when I think most programs start preparing to get themselves like organized for their schedule. I'm sure people hear this all the time, and players have heard it from their clubs, but not doing, making it kind of not like a form like email. Like, I mean, we get a lot of emails, especially if they're coming from the same recruiting service or the same club team, where it's like somebody generated, it's obvious that somebody generated the email for them through the club, because it's like copy and paste, a different person's name, and it just feels like less personal for me. So sometimes when I see that, I'm like, okay, well, if they're doing this, they're sending this out to like a lot of schools. So I'd like to, not that it's not that doesn't mean I'm not going to go watch the player. I become a little less inclined to kind of like put them at the top of my list. And you can only watch so many players when you go out to these events, right? I mean, you're depending on where it's at and how many people on your staff are there. I mean, you have to be very like selective about your time and depending on when these time slots are. So I think being unique when you send these emails to coaches, at least for me, when I get unique emails, something that stands out a little bit that makes it feel like, yeah, they're really interested in our program and they know a little bit about it, and it's not just a form letter, is, I think, really helpful for me anyway.
All right, so 1 to 2 days out before the showcase, kind of reaching out and letting you know that they're going to be there. And then what's an example of something that a player has said that's been a little bit unique, that's kind of gotten you to want to go and watch them play?
I mean, look, funny enough, like we've had some really like in the subject line, like we've had some players, instead of being like attending, ECNL Florida event, they're like, I mean, lately we've had a couple that were like start off with like come feel the heat or something, like, where it's kind of goofy, but you're like, all right, like, okay, I got to look at this kid's email, because like who would come up with something like that, So, I mean, I think it's just something that kind of catches your eye, where you're like, at least, it doesn't mean necessarily after you do look at the email, you're going to be like, okay, this is a kid I'm going to absolutely go see, but it makes me want to look at their email versus, the ones where, it just kind of feels like, RE, GA event in California. And I mean, you get like 100, 150 of those in the course of, a week. I mean, they all kind of blend in together, right? So, I mean, even when I go back and look at my folder, I start, you're looking at these subject lines, because you can see those partial subject lines before you even click on the email. Like, and when you see those ones that are unique like that, it kind of separates them a little bit. So I don't know, that's what it does it for me sometimes. I've been doing this for a long time. So
Yeah, so that unique subject line, and then in the body of the email, right, you want to get their schedule, obviously, maybe the team that they're playing for. What bullet points are you looking for in the email that, they got your attention to open the email? Now what do they need to do to solidify that you're going to go watch them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful to have a good, like, concise, quality video that I can write up at the top, because, for me, that's how you kind of, I guess, filter out, again, your time's limited. If I'm on my own, or if I only am able to bring, like, there's only 2 of us going from our staff, we have to be, kind of very deliberate about where we're going. And so I think getting not a long video, but something that kind of gives me a snapshot if I don't know the player or the team, that I can look at quickly and be like, okay, that's intriguing. Like, they're, obviously the position that they play, if they're play multiple positions, knowing that is good, because sometimes as a coach, we're like in certain years, you're looking for specific positions, right? And especially now, with this roster limit, coming on the horizon, I think programs are going to be, before you could take flyers and on kit players. It didn't matter that maybe you were already deep in a certain area of your team positionally. You could, if you saw like best available player and you were like, all right, well, that player could be really good for us. Even though I'm not really looking for that position, I'm going to go ahead and go watch this player. Now it's like, man, I'm really deep in that area, and I'm not so deep in this area. I need a specific position now, like focus that I'm looking for. So kind of knowing that a player is where they play primarily, where they could potentially play or have played, I think is really helpful to know for me. So that video, that position or positions, that the obviously the clear cut schedule of the event that they're at, where and the details that go along with that, the field number. I like it when players send me like the address to the facility, because it's nice to have that on there, and then when you get in your car or whatever, then it's just, and some people, obviously you probably can find that, you would find that yourself, but for me it's convenient I like it when players attach that address at the bottom of their schedule, so it makes it easier for me and my staff to kind of find the place. So especially if it's not like one of those kind of well-known tournaments that we've been to before. Maybe it's something different, because for programs, I think any program now, especially unless you're like, North Carolina and you're, winning you're just coming off the national championship, or you're a consistent like top 10 program every year in the country, like all of us need to find ways and venues and different events to go kind of find players that are not so obvious. We've got to kind of think outside the box. We've got to find opportunities to turn over new rocks and discover new players. And sometimes going to these kind of big tournaments isn't the answer, right? I mean, it isn't. I mean, as good as it is to have all these players in one location, there's a lot of programs out there, a lot more than not, that need to have other opportunities and venues to find players. And I think that's what players need to understand. Doesn't, just because you don't play ECNL or GA doesn't mean you can't get yourself to the right program and be seen. But it's just, you got to figure out different alternatives that make sense for you and family.
What are some different alternatives that those players can use? Maybe they don't have an ECNL club near them, or the circumstances don't allow it. Like, what are some different ways players can get exposure now?
Yeah, I mean, there's different views on the ID camps, right? I mean, and we do, in the past, we've done, a specific ID camp for USF, like for our program. Like, it's just kind of like, hey, come do it. And if people have players have a real vested interest in wanting to explore our university, then they're going to come to that specifically. Like, when I was involved in club, because I have been involved in different clubs throughout my career, obviously these ID camps where a lot of programs come and are represented, have become more kind of like common knowledge and commonplace. And so I think, it's, if you're going to go as a parent, unless you're like, hey, I want to go to, this is where I want to go to school, and I want to, absolutely see the campus and like be there. I think if you're one of those players that's kind of just like, I mean, I don't know exactly where I want to go, but I like a lot of these programs. Like, I always encourage parents to, if you're going to spend the money on an ID camp, go to a place where you can be seen by as many programs or as many quality programs as you can, because, sometimes just limiting yourself to going to an ID camp on a university's campus where their staff is the only one being represented there, that's exactly what you're getting, right? I mean, you have to be very deliberate about and know that program is very interested in you, and this is your way to get a kind of firsthand up close look at that university. But like, if that's not the case, which I think is for a lot of these players that don't play ECNL or GA, they're not getting like eyes on them, right? So going to these ID camps that offer them an opportunity to be seen by a number of different programs, I always recommended to parents in the club scene, or parents that reached out to me that weren't involved in ECNL or GA or events, leagues where they were getting a lot of eyes on them. So I mean, I'm not one for telling parents to go spend money on ID camps if it doesn't make sense, but I think in the sense that you can go to an ID camp and be seen by 6, 8, 10, 12 different programs in the course of like a day or two. I mean, I think it's worth money well spent, in my opinion.
Yeah, and given not just that you're there and you're getting the eyeballs on you from all the coaches, but a lot of these ID camps, the coaches are doing the actual coaching. So talk about all of the other benefits that you get from attending an ID camp with a number of different coaches.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it gives the player an opportunity to kind of get a sense of that coach's personality, and how they run a session, how they interact with them. And on the flip side, it gives us, it gives the coach an opportunity to interact with these players and, obviously not kind of like, recruit them necessarily, because there's rules that go along with being involved with this, but it doesn't stop you from getting to know each other's personality. And I think that sometimes in this recruiting world, there's a time clock on things, right? And I think you sometimes feel the process is rushed, for one reason or another, and you kind of miss the opportunity as a player or as a coach to really kind of get to know each other. And then sometimes, things don't work out because of that, right? So I say anytime, as a coach or a player, you have the opportunity to interact with somebody that you might be interested, in playing for, like it's a tremendous opportunity, because, too often, like I said, you just there's not enough time. And this is a decision that, the player is making potentially for the next 4, years of their life to be part of this program. And, getting to know the people that you're going to be around day in and day out, I think is really important, and vice versa. Right. I mean, as our time is limited as coaches. So anytime we can get into a setting where, we are in a kind of one-on-one or kind of working environment with players and kind of get to see maybe things you wouldn't see in a more rehearsed kind of meeting on campus or a telephone call, I think it's really beneficial for both parties.
So let's say that I've gone to your ID camp, or I've gone to an ID camp where you're there, you're my coach. Now, what are the things you want to see out of my play that are going to get you to say, okay, I'm going to follow up this player. I want to get them on campus now?
Yeah, I mean, I think some players go into these events and they're like, I've got to just destroy it, right? I've got to do so much. And then they ultimately put so much pressure on themselves that they really just play themselves out before they, even step on the field. So for me, I'm looking, it's positionally, there's a whole lot of different things, but in general, without getting position specific and, qualities for different positions that we look for and want those boxes checked. I think you're looking for, players that bring a lot of energy, and you can see that they're focused on what they're doing there. They're not there. It's not a social necessary. You want to see they got a bit of kind of something to them, personality, right? That's important. But I think as a coach, I can get that from kind of like small little interactions with them. So I'm not like looking for somebody to be like the life of the party at these ID, events, or even the most serious player out there. But I'm looking for somebody that kind of is dialed in, is focused. Their energy like separates them from the rest of the group. I think is really important to me, and helps catch the eye of coaches. And that they're consistently effective during the course of the day, and then they do certain things. They don't have to do, not everything a player does has to be like, mind blowing, right? And I think that's where players get caught up, like thinking every time I get on the ball, I need to do something fantastic that the coaches are just like wowed. No, I mean, if you're consistent, you do things like properly and efficiently, and then you have some wow moments, even if it's one or two in the course of the event or the day, then that for me is enough to kind of like write down a player and be like, this is somebody that I really like. This is somebody that I want to see more of, that type of thing. But, if somebody starts, if there are no wow moments, there isn't good energy, and you're just not at the very least, you're not like efficient at the event, like you consistently are making mistakes, then that's a kind of surefire way to kind of get kind of crossed off the list, I guess, for lack of a better word, because I mean, that's a lot of times you're going to these events for me, I'm looking for that player, but I'm also looking at players that I'm like, okay, this player is not what I'm looking for. And then a lot of times that for me is just as valuable as finding that one that I am looking for. Because, ultimately you have these kids come back and write you and they want to have feedback on you. And I do my best to try and take little notes on like every single player. Sometimes it's just like one or two words, right? But I feel like these players come to these ID camps and pay their parents or they in certain situations pay good money to come to these ID camps. And I want to make sure that they feel like they were evaluated, they were recognized, whether that's a good on the positive or the negative side, that obviously depends on the individual during the event. But I mean, those are the things I'm looking for. And I think honestly, it sounds a little bit, maybe too general, but the energy piece is like really big for me. Like coming out there and having just really good energy and better energy than all or most of the players that come in those ID camps, at least for me, gets me my eyes gravitating towards that player. And I think some players go out there and they just they want to kind of blend in, right? You can't, nobody's asking you to play outside your comfort zone, but they have to do something where they don't just blend in with the rest of the, 50, 60, 70 participants at these ID camps.
Definitely. So let's say that there's a girl that, she knows to start the recruiting process early. She's coming to these ID camps freshman, sophomore year. What does she need to do to stay on your radar up until the moment that you can reach out to her junior year?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, obviously we're limited on any kind of contact that we can have with them until June 15th of their junior year. And so I think just being persistent. I mean, I get players that do a really good job of, not every week. I don't think any coach is looking to receive something every week from a player. And we get those sometimes, and nothing wrong with it. It's just, for me, I like, if it's leading up to an event, then that's a kind of a different story, right? But just in the grand scheme of things, I think like sending an updated video link, once a month or once every 6 weeks, if you have it, if it's more time in between that event and or the last event and this one coming up, then that's fine too. But I like to see players that are really invested in showing the coaches like, hey, here is my latest event, and this is what this is what I've been working on. This is what the feedback has been from my coaches where I need to get better. And I feel like this does a really good job of showing that, I'm doing better in that area. Or, there's a lot of times where somebody will, like have a game on the weekend or two games, and it's not necessarily an event, like a tournament or a showcase. And they'll be like, Coach, I just had 2 matches, really tough matches this weekend, and our team won, both games or whatever. And I contributed to the success of our weekend. And here's a highlight video from the weekend. And it's like, a minute, couple minutes long, if that, and that I think is really nice when you get these little small periodic videos from these players, where the more I see a player on video, I'm one that I need to see him in person, right? I mean, video is huge and I love it. But I think like for me to kind of cross over that final line to be like, oh, I really like this player and I want this player. At the end of the day, I need to lay eyes on him. But the video and getting little bits and pieces of video, again, in snapshots, obviously we all are busy and everybody only has so much time in the day. So like when a player sends me, a full game or 2 full games, the chances of me watching that game are pretty slim, like the entire thing. So again, at the end of the day, I'm going to want to lay eyes on them in person and evaluate them in person. So getting these like snapshot kind of video highlights for me is really helpful to kind of get a real sense of that player and, whether how much I really want to kind of move my schedule around and get to see that player. So I think that for me is kind of the most helpful thing, and not necessarily receiving these long, drawn out emails. Like for me, it's like kind of details, get to the point quickly and just kind of relay the pertinent information. And they don't have to be like long books, because I think some players feel like, oh, the more I like put down on here, the more the coach is going to be engaged to read it. No, it's the exact opposite for me. I mean, give me the fine points and let me be able to skim through it. And if you can do that and then you provide that video, then that for me is something that's beneficial for me.
So how many times do you need to see a player for you to want to move forward and bring them on campus and kind of get them recruited?
I would say twice for me. Once to determine, like, catch my eye, a second time to reconfirm that was, what I saw is what I saw. And then also on the flip side, sometimes you've heard about, you hear through the grapevine, or you have club coach contacts who are really high on a player, and you go out and see him play, and then you trust this person, and then you go out and see him play, and maybe the player just has like the worst day possible for them. Well, it's the same for me. Like, I don't want to just go and be like, okay, this is what this player is about. Like, I want to go see him a second time to give them the benefit of the doubt, to make sure that, hey, I got nervous, I had a bad day, or, whatever the case may be. So for me, I would say at least 2. If I can see him a few more times within that timeline and it makes sense, and the timeline allows it, then I will. but for sure, but definitely 2.
Yeah, you definitely got ahead of me on that piece of the references and what other coaches are saying about players. So how much weight does that hold in your eyes in terms of going to look at a player?
Yeah, I mean it helps. I mean, because you know you have to be you have to have resources to kind of find out about players, and sometimes maybe it's a little puffed up. But that's just on us as coaches building relationships with these different club contacts and sometimes recruiting services, whatever the case may be, and kind of knowing them. Like we all as coaches have a lot of contacts. I have certain contacts that I trust, but I know that when they tell me something about a player, it's going to be said with a lot of energy and maybe even like not embellished, that's not the right word, but they're trying to be very positive. And sometimes it's up to me to understand and know this contact the best I can, so that I'm like, okay, he or she really likes this player, but I know they're a bit enthusiastic, and when it comes to describing players' athletic ability or technical ability, so I have to kind of take that into consideration. But but ultimately it's up to me. Like I think they're trying to help their player, get viewed, help them if they've already been seen, kind of help you get over the kind of finish line with it. And that's that's what their jobs are, right? To help these players. But I think the good ones know, like, hey, yeah, it's my job to help this player, but it's also my job to be completely transparent with the coaches, so that we're not pointing these players into an environment where they're not going to be successful. And I mean, we all want to help our players out, but at the end of the day, I'd rather not talk a coach into taking a player that I may not feel like is quite ready, not only for their sake, but for the player's sake, right? I mean, with the transfer, portal and just players making kind of decisions, rush decisions sometimes, or not well thought out decisions. It's important that they try and really view everything from all angles. And I think the references are super important to get a better understanding of players' character, I think, more than anything. And obviously kind of uses that as a platform to kind of bounce what I've seen on them in person, are like, what are their references that I know saying about the player, and does it kind of match up with what I'm thinking? And or are we completely off base from what I'm hearing from them versus what I saw? So the references are really important. I wouldn't say they're the deciding factor, but they're a small part of the process for sure. But I would say more so from a character standpoint, kind of trying to feel out my references to make sure there's no yellow or red flags for any of these players. And that helps I think programs and coaches save time, because if you start hearing that players maybe don't have the best work ethic at training or whatever the case may be, these are like kind of little things that maybe the reference wasn't saying necessarily to like hurt the player, but as a coach, you kind of, when you hear something from a reference saying, oh man, coach, she's a gamer, she's a gamer. I'm telling you, like, you might go watch her at a training session and be like, oh, okay, well, she's all right, but trust me, like, you watch her in a game and you're going to be, that to me is a yellow flag, right? I mean, you're telling me she's a gamer, but she's like, doesn't work that hard at training, right? I mean, these are, things that kind of, when I think these references and these contacts are trying to do to support the player, like talk them up. But as a coach, I have to kind of like, I can't just get fixated on she's a gamer. I've got to like kind of hear the whole picture. And like I've been kind of saying throughout this whole kind of podcast is that as a coach and as a player, you only have like X amount of time in the process, right? And you're not going to be able to hit every school as a player. You're not going to be able to examine every school, every coach, see every school. Like that's just the reality of it. Just like as us as coaches, we're not going to be able to see every player. In a lot of cases, we're not going to be able to read every single email that comes across our system. And that's unfortunate because players put the time in to reach out, and there's some level of expectation that coaches are going to read their email. But quite frankly, there's times where they get lost in the shuffle. And I'm not going to sit here and say I'm able to read every single email that comes across my system. But I try, but it's just not possible. And I think the same goes on the other end for players. Like it's just, you got to figure out a way to kind of be efficient with your time on both ends. And from a player's perspective, that means you got to narrow down to really focus in on a realistic group of schools that make sense for you.
So given the changing recruiting rules and things that players can do in today's modern game, what's the number one thing, independent of where the player is located, what league they play in, that a player should do throughout the recruiting process in today's game to get more exposure with college coaches?
Man, that's a great question. I think using, it's maybe easier said than done. So like if I have like a really like hypothetically, if I have a really good contact with a club, then I would say that player should try and use, the players that are at that club that are interested in my university should use that to their advantage. Because if they know that there's like a really good pre-existing relationship between a club and a college coach or a club contact, then they can kind of use that club contact as an intermediate to kind of really have conversations about them with that coach. Again, for me, it's that contact doesn't necessarily mean that's going to like help get over the finish line in terms of the final decision being made. But when I hear from people that I trust, I respect, that I've like had a working relationship with, and they keep bringing up like a player's name to me, then that carries a lot of weight in at least kind of vetting that player and wanting to kind of find out more, right? I mean, it just happened the other day to us. Like I had gotten an email from a player, and it came from like she plays for somebody else, but in the course of reading her email, right at the top, she had a name of a contact that I've worked with for years, and that I respect. And so it wasn't necessarily like where she was at, but it was the person that she mentioned right at the top of the email that I had worked with and that I had respected, that caught my eye. And then as soon as I read that, I didn't even finish reading the email. I saw it, and then I went to one of our staff members and I said, hey, like dig into this player more. Like, here's the email, look at the video, and let me know what you think. And they were like what? Like, kind of like, oh, why, why'd you end up wanting to do that? Because I was like, because I saw a contact of mine on there that I've known for a long time. So, I mean, obviously that's not all that's kind of like I think a rarity where you can do that. You know, like not everybody, there's only a certain percentage of the players that can kind of do that, and where that actually falls into place where you can use your club coach or club contact, recruiting liaison at the club to make those inroads with the college coach. So, there's like a whole lot of there's a whole big percentage out there of players that need to figure out other ways to get in front of them. And I would just say, like I said, I think being persistent with the emails, and not to the point where you're like, I think where you turn a coach off. Like, I mean, there is a line of overkill where you get to a point where I think college coaches are like, oh my goodness, Sally wrote us again. Like, this is getting, like to be too much. It's like every other day we're getting an email. So I think it's important players understand, like, being persistent doesn't mean you have to be like, cross that line of like, all right, this is getting to be too much kind of thing. And so I think you got to be calculated as a player and about the timing of when you're releasing these emails. And I think trying to, keep them brief and short, but also, like I said, like add something different. Like, even if it's just a small little like detail that's happened between the last time you reached out to the coaches and this time, whether that's, like I told you before, using a different video from a game on the weekend, or, and I think kind of letting, not that I'm looking to dig into players' like personal lives, of course, but, and I'm not looking for them to share a ton about that stuff, but it's like refreshing sometimes to kind of hear from players about, something even like small that wasn't about like the soccer game on the weekend, like maybe even if it's like something funny that like happened on their like trip, or, maybe they, their parents their dad's is up for the Nobel Peace Prize. I don't know, but you know what I mean? Like something that is like kind of unique and stands out, that kind of in my head, like those kind of things like help me kind of get to understand the player, and it helps me separate that player from players that are just emailing me the same format and all they're talking to me about is like the soccer piece. So like I said, finding ways to kind of distinguish yourself, like we talked about at the ID camp, like trying to not just blend in, but be a little bit unique. Like there's ways you can do this in your emails without putting too much effort in, and have it be natural. And those little kind of moments, stick in my brain. Like, oh, there's Sally wrote me, and like I want to, like I'm interested to read what she's got to say today, or I want to see, because she's always got the updated video. And that, I think it's half the battle is just getting yourself in the door, right? Once you get yourself in the door, then there's the other half. Now it's up to you as a player to kind of like bring it home. Like now it truly is going to be about like what can I do from a soccer standpoint, and if I'm obviously lucky enough to get on campus, what can I do from a character and a personality standpoint to do that. I mean, I tell you, and I know you didn't ask me about this, but like once those players get on campus, we've had I would say we've had 10 official visits in the last like 2 or 3 months. And man, it is so refreshing. We had like 4 or 5. I mean, they were all good, good young ladies, no problem, like very polite. But man, there were like 2 or 3 of them that were like off the charts, like engaging, like look you in the eye, like they're doing the talking if they're with their parents. They're not letting their parents kind of like speak for them, and very articulate. I just find these days, and that not that players that aren't articulate, I just find that they find it hard to, or not necessary to like communicate more. Like they're, and we can blame it on, technology and social media and all that kind of stuff. But when I have players that come on campus and visit, like if they're engaging, and and I know they're interested, that goes a long way for me. The ones that are kind of like the parents are doing all the talking and they're sitting back and, like kind of like, like maybe they're not disinterested, but they're definitely not engaged, right? And these are little things I'm watching. But it was just, my point is that when you go on campus, like that's a player's opportunity to make a real impression, like off the field, right? At this point, it's not about soccer anymore. And maybe you're as good as like Sally is, but Sally's like, what's going to separate you from like Sally at that point when you're not on the field, right? And this is like an interview. Like this is an opportunity for you to put your best foot forward. And when players do that and they're engaged and they've come in, that, it happens. It doesn't happen as often as you might think. I think the norm is for players on visits to just be polite and maybe not say a whole lot. And then maybe they ask one or two questions and then they leave and feel like, okay, that was a good visit. It's more like they're kind of evaluating us instead of feeling like they're being evaluated themselves. But that is happening, right? And when somebody puts their best foot forward and leaves a lasting impression, like off the field, that goes a long way for me. So I think that's just as important as the soccer piece.
Yeah, and families always ask, why do I need to start the recruiting process early? Well, a lot of the things that we talked about, getting in front of the coaches, developing the relationships, getting your academics in order, and ultimately being a really good soccer player on the field. So talk to me a little bit about the demands of playing college soccer, not just at the Division I level, but across all levels, because they're growing and growing in terms of the level every single year.
Yeah. The demands are there. I mean, regardless of whether you decide to play, NCAA Division 1, 2, 3, NAIA junior college level, whatever path you decide to go down, there's a commitment level, right? There's a commitment level to your teammates, to your coach, to the process, and the university and the athletic department. It's all there. I mean, obviously, the higher the level that you commit yourself to, I think there's this perceived, level of commitment, right? Like the expectation. And I tell this to players that I've talked to that come on visits, or if I'm on the phone with them, and I make sure that they understand, listen, there's a commitment wherever you go. It doesn't matter what level you go to, but like at our university, in our program, like this is like we're trying to compete for a national championship. So like we understand you're a student athlete. You're here first and foremost to earn your degree, right? But right there, kind of hand in hand with it, is the competition of college athletics. And the competition here is like very high. So I always ask players, like, hey, step back and evaluate what you're trying to get out of your college experience. What is that? Like rank, talk, put down on paper, like how important the social aspect is, to you in your college experience, than like the athletic and the academic piece. Because I said, there's a time and a place at every school, take advantage of that social aspect that we all kind of see, or the players see and kind of hear about when they're growing up. Like, oh yeah, college is so great. It's the best 4 years of your life. Right. But there's, like, I try and make very clear to the players that yes, there's a time and a place for that. But like, if you choose to come here, like, this is the sacrifices and the commitment that you're going to have to make and that is expected of you. And so there's going to be some time for socializing, but your family, your social, like, kind of interaction, most of it's going to come, especially in the fall, is going to come from your team. Like, that's your family, right? I mean, that's who you're, like it or not, like, and hopefully you like it. That's who you're going to be kind of like engaged with almost on a kind of 24/7 basis sometimes, like that's it. Like, I mean, of course, yeah, after the season, when you're on your off season, then you have more time to explore, your environment and look at different things that the university has to offer and kind of be that kind of check that space out. But I would just say, like, like, I think there is a difference between level of commitment and sacrifice depending on which program you go to. And I mean that not just from a Division I to a Division II level, because there's Division II programs that are elite, right? That where the level of and the expectation of commitment is absolutely on par with anything that you'd find in Division I. There's just not as many, like that, right? And I think you can kind of see, like, over the years, probably guess or kind of put down on paper which of those kind of have that level of commitment because of the success that they've had over the years. And same goes for Division I. I mean, there's different programs that have different expectations, right, within Division I. And I think that's what the player needs to kind of like first figure out before they even start kind of like trying to decide which kind of school they want to go, what school they want to go to, is like find out, look at themselves and be like, okay, like, how committed am I to, like, college athletics? In this case, my soccer experience in college. Like, how much time am I willing and able to commit to this? And then I think if you start to look at that on paper and you think, man, social aspects was like, that's important to me, then you probably aren't going to be wanting to, and if it's something that you're not willing to trade off and give and sacrifice, then you're probably not looking to go to, a top or, 25 program in the country. I mean, you may want to, as a player, you may be like, I want to go to a top 25 program. But if you really are honest with yourself and you're kind of looking at what your willingness is to sacrifice, and if that is not there, then you're probably putting yourself in a situation that's not ultimately going to be successful, because it can be a grind. And it, like, trust me, I mean, I see players on the front end say, I'm all in, and then they get there and like live it. And then halfway through the season, they were like, man, I had no idea that the commitment level was going to be like this high. I'm like worn out. Like, this is more than I thought I was getting myself into. It's not what I wanted. And unfortunately that I see that happen, not obviously with every player, but it happens, and it's not a rarity. It happens more than you would think. And I think that's what players need to do. They need to be more aware of what they actually want and what they're willing to give up for the process, and not just like look at the shiny apple and be like, man, that looks awesome, I want that. Like, that's great, but you've got to kind of understand what's inside that kind of shiny apple to understand whether or not that's going to be something you want to take a bite out of, right? I mean, there's no shame in going to a really good university that maybe you know from talking with the coaches, or you have friends or players within your club that have been there previously, like that's the best resource in my opinion. Like when you have former players or even that you played with that, or maybe you didn't play with, but are from your club that went to that university, man, you should not waste the opportunity to use them as a resource and go like, hey, especially if it's the same coaching staff, like, hey, what do you think about how was your experience at, that school? Like, what was the staff like? I mean, you can get like as a player and as a family, you can get the best insight from somebody like that who just like lived it, right? And if you start to hear a whole lot of, you have to take it grain of salt because, sometimes maybe that player didn't get to play. And so maybe they're a little bitter about the situation, but I mean, it never hurts to ask, right? You're going to get, I think you can put it together and figure out if it's, but I think, 9 times out of 10, being able to ask a player that's been through that university that there's some connection with, is one of the most beneficial things from trying to figure out the experience of it.
Give me a quick insight into USF. How did the spring season go, and what are some things that you're going to take away and try to implement into the fall now?
Yeah, I mean, it's like every year for us, it's about development and, trying to move forward. I mean, listen, we're not under the illusion. Our team is going to look different in the fall, right? We graduated players. I mean, that happens to all of us. We graduate players. We bring in new players. Some of us some coaches recruit players for their system. Others recruit the player and then kind of figure out what they can do from the strengths and, weaknesses of their players. So for us, it was about just kind of looking at our system, determining, looking at players that maybe didn't have a real, thorough look in the fall, to kind of have, get playing time. So it's an opportunity for them to kind of, get that opportunity. And we want, and it's also for us, an opportunity for us to see a player in a, like a starting role. Okay. Maybe they played in the fall, but they were always coming off the bench. Now we're starting them in a game, and that's a completely different mindset, right? To start a match versus coming off the bench. Sometimes it's more difficult to come off the bench than it is to start, right? And vice versa. But it gives us some insight, like psychologically, into our players on how they handle that. Some players you find out are just not good at starting games. They're more comfortable, like kind of letting the game go. And then they're like, once they've had a chance to kind of like really examine what the game is about, then you put them in and they're at their best. So it's kind of little things like that we're trying to figure out if, what we used the previous year in terms of our system and the way that we went about it is something that we can do with the current group we have now. Or if we need, we're going to have to make some changes because we're just not the same team we were from last year. So I think kind of just getting to know our team better, building those relationships that already exist, and, ultimately just kind of making sure our players like start to understand and, and continue on with that culture. Like we want to, for me, building a culture takes time, right? It's not you can't do it in one season. So for me, it's just about trying to really keep hammering home and developing that culture so that it does become second nature, so that when the new players come in, that our current players are prepared to kind of live that culture and help them kind of like transition into that culture. And we're not constantly being, as a staff, constantly being teachers. Like we want to kind of extend that power and that responsibility to our current players. right? So that's kind of what the spring has been for us. And I think we had a productive spring in that sense. And then obviously you get to compete. We treat every game like we're trying to win, even though the games don't count against you, and like they do in the fall. Our desire is to replicate the spring like the fall, and when we lose, like, we're disappointed, right? We don't chalk it up and be like, it's only a spring game. No, like, we're disappointed. We look at it, we dig into the game. What did we do wrong? Like, what could we have done better as a staff? And so that's kind of what we got out of the spring, and now we're kind of at the tail end. We're in the last week of 8 hours next week, and then the girls have start preparing for final exams.